What time is it where you are? And where are you listening from? If you enjoy long, slow science, the kind that gently fades into thought and helps you drift, consider subscribing to this channel. We explore calm ideas, one breath at a time. Tonight, we begin with a quiet question, one that feels almost playful, yet sits beneath some of the most profound concepts in physics. What if time, just for a moment, simply stopped? What if everything paused for exactly 1 hour? It is a tempting idea, but to understand it, truly, we need to begin with what time actually is, not metaphorically, not poetically, but physically, scientifically, and very slowly. Time, in physics, is not just a way to measure events. It is part of the structure of reality itself. In Einstein's theory of relativity, time is not separate from space. It is joined with it. Together, they form what physicists call space-time. This is not a poetic phrase. It is the actual fabric that underlies everything that moves, everything that rests, and everything that changes. Time is the fourth dimension. Not an extra dimension like in science fiction, but one that flows differently from the other three. In space, you can move forward and backward, left and right, up and down, but time moves only forward, 1 second at a time, always in one direction. This directionality, this forward flow, is what we experience as the arrow of time. And it exists because of something called entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder, and in the universe, disorder tends to increase. Systems evolve from order to chaos over time. A shattered glass does not unshatter. Smoke rises, but does not gather back into logs. Heat spreads from hot to cold, but never gathers spontaneously. This irreversible change from order to disorder is what gives time its sense of movement. Not the ticking of a clock, but the increase of entropy. So when we ask, what if time stopped for 1 hour? We are not just imagining frozen clocks. We are asking, what if entropy itself stopped increasing? What if the entire structure of space-time paused? Let's go deeper. To pause time would mean every single change everywhere would have to halt. Every atom, every particle, every field, every wave. In our everyday experience, time is measured by clocks. But those clocks, whether mechanical, atomic, or digital, all depend on motion. A pendulum swings, a quartz crystal vibrates, an electron transitions between energy levels. Even the most precise clocks in the world, atomic clocks, depend on the oscillation of atoms. In cesium clocks, for instance, time is measured by counting 9,192, 631,170 oscillations of the cesium-133 atom. That number defines 1 second. So if time truly stopped even at the quantum level, those oscillations would stop. Electrons would freeze, particles would pause, light itself would stop moving, and that has consequences. Light, after all, travels at a fixed speed, roughly 299,792 kilometers per second. It is the universal speed limit, not just for light, but for all massless particles and all causal interactions. If time stops, then light stops, and if light stops, then vision ceases. Not gradually, instantly. Your retinas, which depend on photons striking photoreceptor cells, would receive no information. The optic nerve would transmit nothing. Your awareness would vanish, not slowly, but in a frozen instant, and it would not just be vision, it would be everything. Sound? Gone. Sound is vibration, molecules bumping into each other. If time is frozen, motion is frozen, so sound waves cannot propagate. Breathing. Frozen. Molecules of oxygen do not move. Lungs do not contract. Thought. Also frozen. Neurons require the flow of ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, through delicate channels. These flows depend on time. Without it, there is no change in voltage, no communication between cells. In short, if time stops, experience stops. And not just for humans, for everything. But here's where it gets more subtle. Imagine, hypothetically, that time stops everywhere in the universe, except for you. Somehow you keep moving. Somehow your consciousness continues for exactly 1 hour while everything else is frozen. What would you see? Stillness. Complete and absolute stillness. No wind, no motion, no sound, not even the hum of electricity or the flicker of light. Just silence. And immobility. If light has frozen, then photons are suspended in space. A beam of light from the sun hangs mid-air motionless. Shadows freeze on the pavement. Ripples in water lock into place like glass. And more than that, molecules in the air stop vibrating. That means temperature stops, because temperature at its root is a measure of the average kinetic energy of particles. If particles stop moving, then temperature is undefined. Cold does not deepen. Heat does not rise. There is no warmth, only a motionless state without sensation. Even gravity, which moves at the speed of light, would pause in its propagation. Tidal forces from the moon, the warping of space-time by the sun, all remain frozen, suspended in equilibrium. But here's the paradox. For you to move while the universe is frozen, you would need to be outside the laws of physics. Your body would need energy. But energy transfer requires time. Your brain would need thought. But thought requires change. It is not possible, even in theory, to be a moving observer in a frozen universe. Not under the known laws of physics. You cannot be inside the painting, and also outside the brush. So perhaps the better version of the question is this. Not, what if time stopped for 1 hour and I watched it? But rather, what would happen to the universe if time, everywhere, stopped for 1 hour and then resumed? This version doesn't require a conscious observer. Only the laws of physics. Only systems frozen and then restarted. And now the picture becomes more interesting. In the next section, we'll explore what happens exactly when time starts again. How would the resumption of motion, light, heat, and life unfold? Would the world pick up where it left off, or would something be lost? All across the universe, from the tiniest particles to the largest galaxies, time is the medium through which change occurs. If for exactly 1 hour that medium had stopped, if everything had remained in perfect suspension, the question becomes, what happens when it starts again? This isn't just a matter of pressing play after a pause, because nothing was simply waiting. Nothing was aware. Nothing accumulated energy. It wasn't a slow build. It was absolute stillness, an hour of zero activity, zero progress, zero decay, zero flow. But then the motion returns. And in that first instant, the universe resumes not with a jolt, not with a bang, but with continuity. Because the laws of physics do not remember that anything paused. There was no passage of entropy, no movement of heat or charge or particles. No memory is left in the fabric of reality itself. Time is not a movie reel that remembers being paused. It simply continues. Every atom picks up at the exact position it held. Every photon continues its path. Every field resumes its fluctuations. But the idea of perfect synchronization across an entire universe carries its own strange implications. Because the cosmos isn't one object. It's a vast field of systems, some independent, some entangled, some incredibly sensitive to timing. Let's examine what this resumption of time might look like, starting very small. On the quantum scale, particles exist in probabilistic states. Their locations and properties are not definite until observed or measured. During the pause, these particles, assuming the rules of quantum mechanics remain valid, exist in indefinite states. But with time halted, even quantum uncertainty becomes frozen. The very act of probabilistic fluctuation, of wave function, evolution, depends on time passing. So what restarts is not just particles resuming positions, but probabilities resuming evolution. The wave functions pick up again, gently unfolding into the endless probabilities of future states. Nothing explodes or bursts. Everything simply continues, sagging quietly. In molecules, electron clouds begin to shift again. Bonds flex, vibrations resume, tiny collisions restart in their silent dance. On the scale of life, these vibrations become biochemical processes. A cell, frozen for 1 hour, comes back to life at the exact point it left off. ATP production, DNA transcription, protein folding, all these resume without awareness that anything unusual has occurred. But life depends on systems in balance. Not all cells would survive a total time stop, even if time reactivates without error. Why? Because living organisms have delicate equilibrium systems, pH gradients, ion channels, electrochemical balances. While time is stopped, no degradation occurs. But some functions depend on maintaining that balance over time through active processes. For example, a neuron uses energy constantly to pump ions and maintain its resting potential. A 1-hour pause suspends that, and when resumed, the sudden imbalance may cause dysfunction in some cells, not because time failed, but because not all systems can tolerate being paused and restarted. In the brain, the return of time may result in something like a tiny system shock. Not injury, but confusion. If a human had been in mid-thought, mid-sentence, mid-movement, that moment would resume. But any sensory input, mid-processing, would be distorted. For example, if a sound wave had been reaching the ear when time stopped and resumes its path, it may arrive out of sync with motor commands. The experience would be imperceptible. Yet strange, a feeling like a moment lost, a blink of disconnection, now scale outward. In cities, electrical grids resume their cycles. Computers continue their calculations. Engines continue turning. But what about systems with external dependencies? Take aviation, a plane in flight, frozen mid-air, suspended by motion through air molecules. With motion paused, lift disappears. But the air itself is frozen too. There is no descent. When time resumes, all forces return. The engines fire, the wings generate lift again, the airflow resumes. It continues as if nothing happened, because for the plane, truly nothing did. In a nuclear reactor, reactions that produce heat by particle interactions would have frozen. Decay chains suspended mid-process. When resumed, decay continues from that exact point. But any cooling system that relies on flowing water would have been halted. If tolerances are precise, even a brief resumption might cause instability or chain errors. Again, not due to the time stop itself, but because of how energy and pressure reaccumulate after a sudden restart. Let's step back even further. What about Earth itself? It rotates on its axis, orbits the Sun, travels through the galaxy. If time stops, all motion ceases, including orbital momentum. So Earth's rotation freezes, its orbit halts. The Moon likewise stops mid-trajectory, but again, when time restarts, motion resumes from the same vector, same speed, same force. Because momentum isn't lost. Time didn't drag. It simply paused the evolving coordinates of every point in space. The Sun continues burning. Not with fire, but with fusion. Hydrogen atoms colliding, forming helium, releasing energy. These processes resume. The light from stars continues to travel. A beam frozen mid-vacuum resumes its journey. Across billions of kilometers, starlight continues moving toward the eyes of observers, who themselves had also been frozen. Even on cosmic scales, gravitational waves, ripples in space-time, continue spreading, as if nothing occurred. Because truly to the universe nothing did. Time stopping is only a meaningful event to beings who experience duration. If all time halts and no observer can record the interval, it is as though it never occurred. Yet there is a final paradox. From the point of view of physics, time is continuous, a parameter of equations. If time stops, those equations are undefined during that period. They are blind to it, but from a human point of view, one might still ask, did something happen in the hour when nothing changed? Did existence continue in some sense, without movement, without entropy, without light? Or was it an hour that never existed at all? We'll explore that philosophical question in the next section, where time, identity, and memory collide. To understand whether a frozen hour in time could exist without anyone experiencing it, we must first examine what it means for something to happen. In physics, something happens when change occurs, when there is a measurable difference in a system from one moment to the next. But if time is stopped, there is no next. There is only a single, unchanging state, no entropy, no motion, no record. So we must ask, if every particle in the universe held its position and nothing changed, not even probability distributions or the positions of quarks, then is that frozen moment part of time at all? Some physicists argue that time is nothing more than a sequence of events. Without events, time has no content. Others suggest that time is a parameter independent of what happens within it, a vast canvas even if nothing is painted on it. But in either view, a frozen hour contains no difference, no experience, and no observable impact. It is like a missing frame in a film. If you never saw it, if nothing referenced it, did it happen? To understand this further, let's consider memory. Memory is not just about storing experiences, it is about ordering them in time. You know that breakfast came before lunch because your mind records a sequence. If time were to stop, not just subjectively but objectively, and then resume with perfect continuity, you would never be able to detect the pause. There would be no gap in the memory because no encoding of the pause could have occurred. Your neurons, frozen, could not have marked the interval, and this extends to all systems of record. Cameras, computers, even radioactive decay clocks, all depend on time's passage to log change. With time halted, no information is recorded. So when time resumes, it is as if no pause occurred. This makes the idea of a paused hour metaphysically challenging. From an external point of view, if such a view existed, we might say, time did not pass for an hour. But from within the system, from the inside of the universe, It would be indistinguishable from an hour that never occurred. This brings us to the nature of causality. Causality is the relationship between cause and effect, between actions and their consequences. But causality only works when there is time for one thing to influence another. A rolling ball knocks over a cup, a match lights a candle, a heart pumps blood. If time freezes, causality ceases. The chain of effects is broken, not by interruption, but by the complete absence of progress. When time resumes, causality resumes. But it does not catch up. There is no retroactive burst of consequence. The ball does not suddenly push harder. The match does not burst with extra flame. The body does not suddenly double its heartbeat. All returns to motion calmly, gently, as if nothing had happened. Let's explore another idea, the experience of a paused universe in the context of relativity. In Einstein's theory of special relativity, time is not absolute. It moves differently for observers in different frames of reference. A person moving near the speed of light will experience time more slowly than someone at rest. This is not imagination, it is measurable. Astronauts in orbit moving rapidly age a few microseconds less than those on Earth. GPS satellites account for this time dilation. So, if time can pass differently for different observers, could it be that time could pause for some and not others? In relativity, the answer is nuanced. You can slow time through speed or gravity, but you cannot halt it completely without violating the core principles of the theory. No frame of reference can experience zero time, because to exist, to measure, to observe, to experience, requires time. So while the universe may appear paused to someone moving at nearly the speed of light, for them, time is still ticking. It never fully stops. To truly stop time in every frame would require freezing all of space-time, not just locally, not just for a person or a planet, but for everything, everywhere. That would be more than physics. It would be a rupture in the fabric of the universe itself. Now let's consider what happens to cosmic systems when time resumes. The Earth resumes its rotation, 1,670 kilometers per hour at the equator. The Moon resumes its orbit, one full revolution every 27.3 days. The Sun continues fusing hydrogen in its core, 600 million tons per second, releasing light that takes 8 minutes to reach Earth. Galaxies continue spinning, expanding, colliding. Dark. Energy continues driving the accelerated expansion of space. All of this resumes without memory of the pause, but some consequences may still emerge, because while physics allows perfect resumption, complex systems are not perfectly robust. Let's look at a few examples. Power grids. Electricity flows in cycles, 50 or 60 hertz depending on the region. If every electron freezes mid-cycle and then resumes, synchronization may suffer. Some systems could experience power surges, transformers may misalign, circuit protections may activate, leading to localized outages. Data centers. Servers handle millions of instructions per second. A freeze in time would halt computation, memory access, and input-output operations. When time resumes, buffers may overflow, systems may detect errors, some operations may fail. Redundancy would limit damage, but not all data would survive intact. Biology. In humans, a pause in time would halt all metabolic processes. Cells depend on constant motion, nutrient uptake, waste removal, pH balance. A sudden stop, even if harmless in the moment, may leave microscopic imbalances when resumed. These might trigger minor cell stress responses, repair enzymes, oxidative balancing. In fragile patients, say, those on ventilators or with pacemakers, even a momentary misalignment in timing could cause detectable events. Again, not because the time stop hurt them, but because restarting systems never happens perfectly in real-world complexity. Finance. Markets are built on continuous valuation. Stocks tick, prices update. If time stops, no trading occurs. But when time resumes, information will appear as if no time passed. In theory, prices should resume unchanged, but in practice, automated systems may misinterpret the freeze. Algorithms designed to respond to millisecond data could behave erratically, triggering flash trades or misvaluations. Again, the issue is not the time stop itself, it's the restart. When a system designed for fluid motion is stopped even temporarily, its resumption may not be smooth. Friction arises in the return, and that leads us to the final point for this section: memory and narrative. For humans, time is not just a physical dimension. It is the medium of memory. A paused hour may have no effect on the brain's biology, but it would also leave no trace in personal history. So the question becomes, if we paused time for an hour and then resumed, but no one could know, would it matter? Is a frozen hour meaningless if it leaves no scar? If nothing changed, nothing remembered, and nothing altered? In the next section, we will consider what would happen to atomic clocks, satellite systems, and the precise instruments of measurement we use to track time, and whether even one of them might detect the impossible. What time is it where you are, and where are you listening from? If you enjoy slow, calm science, the kind that gently wanders through space, physics, and thought without urgency, then consider subscribing to this channel. There are no conclusions here. Only deeper quiet. Tonight, we'll drift further into the strange edges of time and ask, would our most precise tools, the atomic clocks and satellite systems, notice if time truly stopped? Atomic clocks are the most accurate timekeeping devices humans have ever created. Instead of relying on gears or oscillating crystals like old watches, these clocks measure the vibration of atoms themselves. Specifically, they track the natural frequency of microwave radiation emitted or absorbed when electrons in a cesium atom jump between energy levels. This frequency, 9,192,631,170 cycles per second, is so stable that it defines the second itself. In fact, since 1967, 1 second has been officially defined as the duration of 9,192,631,170 periods of this radiation. The astonishing precision of atomic clocks allows them to remain accurate to within 1 second over millions of years. But even they depend on time's continuous passage. If the universe were to pause, if time itself froze, the electron transitions within cesium atoms would halt. The electromagnetic field governing the microwave signal would freeze. The measurement cycle would pause. When time resumed, the atomic clock would continue ticking from the same internal state, unaware that anything unusual had occurred. So no. Even the most precise clock we've built would not notice a gap. It could not, because the process of noticing requires change. And with time frozen, there is no process. Now let's consider the global positioning system. GPS satellites orbit Earth at an altitude of around 20,000 kilometers, and each satellite contains highly accurate atomic clocks. Your phone receives signals from multiple satellites and uses the tiny differences in arrival time to triangulate your location. The entire system depends on ultra-precise timing. Even a microsecond error would result in a positioning mistake of hundreds of meters. To account for time dilation effects from both special relativity, due to satellite speed, and general relativity, due to weaker gravity in orbit, GPS satellites are pre-corrected so their clocks remain synchronized with those on Earth. If time stopped universally, for Earth, for satellites, for all matter and radiation, the system would resume perfectly aligned. No relative error would emerge. But what if time stopped only for a portion of the system? Say satellites froze while Earth continued? Then yes, errors would accumulate, but that would be a local violation of time continuity, not a global pause, and that breaks the very rules of general relativity. Time doesn't flow differently. In arbitrary patches of the universe, it can slow under speed or gravity, but not freeze selectively. That would imply a preferred frame of reference, something Einstein's equations do not allow. So again, we are brought back to the same point. If time stops everywhere, nothing notices. Let's examine the human brain next. Our brains are not single processors. They are billions of cells communicating in rhythms, neuronal firings, oscillating waves, chemical pulses. If time were to pause, all these processes, from synaptic transmission to calcium ion flow, would suspend. Dreams would freeze mid-frame. Thoughts would halt mid-spark. And when time resumes, the brain resumes exactly where it left off, as if nothing ever happened. There would be no flicker, no reboot, no sensation of disconnection, and yet, in the moments after, one might feel something unusual. A sense that something slipped, that a beat was skipped, that reality hesitated. But it would only be imagination, because without memory or motion the mind cannot detect the missing hour. It would be like blinking. Without knowing you blinked. Now let's imagine someone speaking at the exact moment time pauses, a person mid-sentence. The answer is frozen. Their lungs are mid-expansion. Their tongue is curved against their teeth. The air is halfway, between their lips and the listener's ear. When time resumes, the sentence finishes at 42. But what of the sound wave in air? Sound is a vibration of particles. Air molecules compress and expand in a wave pattern, carrying energy from one place to another. During the pause, air molecules freeze. The wave halts. Energy is not lost, and it is suspended. When time resumes, the molecules continue moving. The wave continues its path. The listener hears the word as if uninterrupted. But if you could slow time to an even finer degree, you might notice something eerie, a discontinuity in the vibration, a point where all movement stopped, then restarted, yet no one could perceive it. Our ears are not sensitive enough. Our minds are too coarse. We process sound in chunks, tens of milliseconds. A billionth of a second freeze would be invisible. A 1 hour freeze with no motion at all would be the same. Let's go even deeper. Consider radioactive decay. Some atoms are unstable. They decay into other atoms by releasing particles or radiation, alpha particles, beta particles, gamma rays. The time it takes for half of a sample to decay is called its half-life. For example, uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.5 billion years. These decay processes are quantum mechanical. They rely on probabilistic tunneling through energy barriers. If time pauses, decay stops. When time resumes, the atom continues its existence, as if no time passed. The statistical behavior resumes its slow, steady rhythm. So if we had a sealed container with radioactive material, and we stopped time for an hour, then reopened it, The radiation dose would be exactly what we expect. No time means no change. No emissions occurred. No heat was generated. No transformation. The universe has no log of the missing time. Its history is blank for that hour. But what about systems with memory? Say, a telescope capturing long exposure, images of a star field. The CCD sensor accumulates photons over time. If time stops, no photons arrive. When time resumes, the accumulation continues. The final image will show no indication of the pause. There will be no black band, no distortion. The missing photons were never sent. Or consider a supercomputer running simulations. If time freezes, electrons in the transistors stop moving. The computation halts. No bits are flipped. No calculations proceed. When time resumes, the processor picks up from its last instruction. The simulation continues. No corruption, no data loss, no awareness of the freeze. This is the core lesson. Time is required for change. If time halts, no state transitions can occur. Therefore, nothing can observe, record, or remember the pause. Now, let's explore energy. Where does energy go when time stops? If a pendulum is swinging and time freezes, its kinetic energy is suspended. The motion is paused. Potential energy remains stored. When time resumes, the pendulum continues as if uninterrupted. Energy was not lost. It simply stopped evolving. In thermodynamics, systems tend toward higher entropy, more disorder, over time. If time halts, entropy does not increase. It holds steady. When time resumes, the climb continues. But there is no catch-up, no sudden leap in disorder. Entropy is not a bank account. It does not accumulate interest while paused. The entire thermodynamic arrow of time simply waits. This makes time unique. It is not just a coordinate. It is the stage for every process that defines change. Physics, biology, memory, decay, growth. Remove. Time and all processes freeze, not die, not collapse, just wait. And in the next section, we'll examine a few final thought experiments. What happens to fire, music, light, and how stopping time for just 1 hour, even if undetectable, reveals everything that time truly is. Let's begin gently, with fire. What happens to fire when time stops? To understand this, one must think not just of flames, but of combustion itself, a process of heat, fuel, oxygen, and chemical reaction. When something burns, hydrocarbons break apart and recombine with oxygen, releasing energy as light and heat. This occurs at a rapid pace, thousands of molecular interactions per second. Now imagine a candle flame mid-flicker, frozen. The tiny curl of orange light is not just an image. It's a consequence of countless molecular collisions and electron transitions. The wick is drawing wax upward. The wax is vaporizing, mixing with air, and igniting. When time stops, all of that freezes. The flame does not fade. It does not continue consuming fuel. It simply halts, suspended mid-shimmer. The light from the flame does not reach beyond its current location. Photons in motion are paused. No heat radiates outward. No smoke curls toward the ceiling. Even the air mid-movement stops flowing. Then, when time resumes, the process continues seamlessly. The wax continues to melt. The vapor continues to burn. The photons resume their journey outward. To an observer, there would be no visible break, no flicker, no distortion. The flame resumes its dance as if uninterrupted, because to fire, like all things, time is everything. Now consider music. Music is not just sound, it's patterned sound. a combination of pitch, rhythm, harmony, and resonance. It relies on time not only to exist, but to make sense. A single note stretched infinitely long is no longer music. It's a tone. Music lives in sequence, in the unfolding of notes, the pauses between them, the rise and fall of intensity. So what happens if time pauses mid-song? If a musician is playing and, say, a violinist drawing a bow across the string, then both the movement and the sound it creates freeze. The bow does not move. The string does not vibrate. The sound wave does not travel. The air remains still. If an audience member was hearing the melody, say midway through a phrase, then that sound wave would be paused in its path to the ear. The eardrum would hold its position. The brain, mid-processing, would remain fixed. When time resumes, everything picks up as before. The bow continues its stroke. The string vibrates again. The air resumes carrying the pressure wave, and the listener hears the rest of the note. No break. No skip. Just silence that never existed. If the pause lasted for an hour or a year, there would still be no memory of it. Music requires a mind to track time. And without time, no tracking is possible. The song would simply continue. Now, let's turn to a larger and stranger question. What happens to light? This is not just a question of light bulbs or candle flames, but of light in its deepest sense. Photons, electromagnetic waves, radiation moving through the vacuum of space. Light, unlike matter, has no rest frame. It always moves at 299,792,458 meters per second. It is never at rest. In fact, in a sense, light does not experience time at all. From the moment a photon is emitted, say from the surface of the sun, to the moment it is absorbed, say, by your skin, no time passes for the photon. It exists in a state of movement, not change, but we, as observers within time, experience that journey. If time stops, the photon freezes mid-path. It cannot move, it cannot be absorbed. The electromagnetic wave cannot oscillate. When time resumes, the wave continues its propagation. The photon completes its journey. The sun continues to shine. Stars continue to twinkle. The night sky, frozen for an hour, lights up once more. But what of photons in transit for billions of years? Some light from distant galaxies began its journey, before Earth even formed. It is traveling now through the vastness of space, untouched, unseen. If time stopped for 1 hour, those photons would pause, suspended in nothingness, then resume. The cosmic background radiation, the glow of ancient creation, would continue its faint whisper. No information would be lost, no energy misplaced, just a brief stillness, unnoticed. Let's return to Earth now and think of rivers. A river flows because of gravity, terrain, water pressure. Molecules push against each other, tumbling downhill, eroding rock, carrying nutrients and debris. During a time stop, the water stops flowing. Raindrops freeze mid-fall. Waves freeze mid-surge. Even turbulent rapids become statues. The energy within, the water kinetic gravitationals, is paused, not lost. When time resumes, the water continues its path. The ripples resume. The drops complete their fall. The sound of the river, that low continuous murmur, continues unbroken to our ears. And yet in the deeper layers of the soil, where water slowly seeps and worms move and roots drink, all of that too had paused. The absorption of moisture, the expansion of cells, the chemical signaling between roots and fungi all held their breath. Now resumed, quietly, unchanged. Let's explore one more moment. Breath. A child asleep, mid-inhale. Their chest is rising, gently. Their eyes twitch behind closed lids. Their heart pumps with rhythm. When time stops, the chest holds still. The heart stops. The neurons freeze. The dreams vanish, not ending, just halting mid-frame. And when time returns, the chest continues, rising. The heart continues beating. The neurons resume their whispers. The dream continues. To the child, nothing has occurred. No breath was missed. No heartbeat skipped, because time is not something we perceive directly. It is something we measure by change. Remove change, and you remove time. Remove time, and you remove all change. They are bound. Yet here lies the paradox that stirs even physicists. We experience time as a flowing river. One direction, always forward. But in many equations of physics, especially in quantum mechanics and general relativity, time can run forward or backward. The math is symmetric. It is only entropy, the measure of disorder, that gives time its arrow. Systems tend toward more disorder over time. Ice melts, stars burn, buildings collapse. If time paused for 1 hour, entropy would not increase. It would hold steady. That pause would leave no scar. But here's the strange truth. If something paused entropy, we might not even know, because memory itself relies on entropy. The brain stores memories by changing, by altering neuron structures, by shifting chemical concentrations. These are physical processes governed by entropy. Pause entropy, and you pause memory formation. Pause time, and you pause even the ability to know it happened. And so we reach a profound realization. If time stopped for 1 hour, if every molecule, every photon, every thought and force and field paused, then resumed without error, it would be as if it never occurred. No instrument could detect it. No memory would record it. No record would remain. It would be the perfect ghost, a vanishing event not erased but never written. If a frozen hour leaves behind no scars, no disruptions, no ripples, then what exactly is the purpose of wondering about it at all? That question leads us into the territory of metaphysics and cognitive science. It is not simply about time as a physical dimension, but time as a condition of awareness, the way we structure our understanding of life itself. To ask what happens if time stops is also to ask, what are we without time? Let's begin with a thought experiment, a simple one. Picture a person standing in a room, their eyes half closed, mid-blink, their heart mid-beat, their lungs paused halfway through an exhale. If time is stopped, perfectly and universally, then every molecule in their body is held in place. There is no passage of sensation. There is no waiting. The person does not experience the stillness. They are unaware. And now we ask, in that hour, did that person exist? Of course, the atoms were there. Their body was intact. But experience was not occurring. Consciousness, that flickering flame of moment-to-moment awareness, was suspended. No new thoughts, no sensory input, no change of state. If you define existence purely by mass and location, then yes, the person existed. But if you define existence by being, by the unfolding of conscious perception, then during the pause they did not exist in any meaningful way. They were not dead. They were not asleep. They were simply not happening. This leads us into questions about continuity. Consciousness seems continuous because we have no memory of breaks. We wake from sleep and stitch together the narrative. We fall into anesthesia and emerge, and the mind assumes time simply flowed without us. But if time itself paused, not just the self, not just awareness, but time itself, then the break would be perfectly invisible. A hole in a road no one sees, because it was perfectly patched before anyone walked it. And now let's examine what this means for identity. Who we are, our self, is not a static object. It is a sequence of experiences, memories layered upon memories, decisions and regrets and reactions, and each of these requires time. Your personality is not just encoded in DNA. It is written into the plasticity of the brain, the shifting connections between billions of neurons. Every time you recall a memory, you change it slightly. Every time you reflect on a choice, you reinforce the weight of it. Pause time, and this cascade of identity stops. But here's the catch. When time resumes, nothing has been lost. The person continues where they left off. The unfolding of self picks up without interruption. So did the person miss an hour? They did not notice. They did not age. They did not reflect. For them, it did not occur. This becomes even more striking when extended. Suppose, for instance, that time paused for 1,000 years, but the person resumed the next moment. No aging, no memory, no gap. In their personal timeline, not a single second passed. To the rest of the universe, a millennium has passed. But for them, the moment continues. This is, in a strange way, what happens to cryogenically frozen organisms. If an animal is frozen and revived, it has not aged in the normal sense. Its clock has paused. But time in the outside world continues. If successful, it resumes without knowledge of the gap. Could a pause in time feel the same? We cannot know. Because feeling, awareness, measurement all require time. Let's return to physics now. There is a theory called the block universe which suggests that past, present and future all coexist. That time does not flow but is rather a dimension, like space laid out in totality. In this view we are like a bead on a string, experiencing each moment as now, but all the moments already exist. If this is true, then a pause in time is simply a missing section of the string, or perhaps a section in which nothing changes. A still frame wedged between others, invisible to the bead. The flow of time in this model is an illusion, a consequence of consciousness traveling through a static landscape. In such a reality, a frozen hour is like a quiet valley, unnoticed, unmeasured but existing. But there's another theory, presentism, which says only the present exists. The past is gone. The future is not real yet. Only now is true. In that model, stopping time might mean annihilating existence itself. For if there is no present, then there is nothing. When time resumes, the present reappears. But during the pause, the universe ceases to be, which is correct? We don't know. Both models have their merits and their mysteries. Now let us shift perspectives again. Imagine a laboratory, a quiet room where atomic clocks tick with unimaginable precision. These clocks measure the vibration of atoms, usually cesium, oscillating at a rate of over 9 billion cycles per second. They are so precise that they lose less than a second over millions of years. If time were to pause absolutely across the entire universe, then these clocks would stop. Their atoms would stop vibrating. Their light pulses would freeze. When time resumed, the oscillations would pick up where they left off. To the clock, no time passed. But here is the interesting part. If a pause in time lasted exactly 1 hour, no clock could ever record that hour. Because clocks are not external to time, they are within time. There is no super clock outside. The universe watching it tick. All measurement occurs inside the thing being measured, so no device, no matter how advanced, could tell us if time paused. It's not a failure of technology, it's a limit of logic. We might wonder then about quantum effects. In quantum mechanics, particles exist in states of probability. An electron does not have a precise location until measured. A photon can be both a wave and a particle. Does a time pause affect quantum uncertainty? The answer is likely yes, but in a non-detectable way. Quantum fields, like all fields, evolve over time. A pause halts that evolution. No wave functions collapse, no interactions occur. When time resumes, the quantum landscape continues. No probability is resolved. No entanglement is broken. Superpositions remain unmeasured. Quantum systems are as frozen as classical ones. But again, no evidence remains. The quantum cat remains neither alive nor dead, just paused. Let's consider one last strange angle. Language. Language unfolds in time. The words on this screen, the sounds of this sentence, they carry meaning. Only because they are ordered. Grammar is time. Syntax is sequence. Understanding is change. Without time, language dies, not because it is destroyed, but because it cannot occur. A sentence cannot exist as a single frame. It must move. It must begin and end. Thought itself is linguistic. Concepts arise in structured progression. Pause time and the sentence disappears, not from memory but from possibility. When time resumes, the sentence continues, and now you see why this script too is nothing more than a river of time. Each word follows another. Each thought builds upon the last. If time paused even for an hour, this entire reading would cease, mid-thought, and then resume, like nothing ever happened. In ancient times, before clocks and science, before seconds and satellites, humans still knew time. They felt it not in numbers, but in rhythm, in the shadows of the sun, in the way bread rose, or water wore stone, or wounds slowly healed. To says, them time was not a force but a presence, sometimes gentle, sometimes cruel, but always and inevitable. If you had asked a philosopher 2,000 years ago, what would happen if time stopped, they might have tilted their head and asked, for whom? Because in many ancient systems of thought, time was not universal. It was spiritual, emotional. It passed differently for gods and mortals, for the dreaming and the dead. Let's begin with the Greeks. For them, there were two kinds of time, chronos and kairos. Chronos was clock time, sequential, measurable, orderly. This is the time we know best now. The time of minutes, deadlines, calendars. Kairos was different. It was qualitative. It meant the right time, a moment thick with meaning, a sliver of opportunity. Kairos could not be measured with a sundial. It could only be felt. In a pause of chronos, kairos may still stir. If time stopped, but a person somehow floated in the stillness, would they feel a sacred silence, a heaviness of meaning? Perhaps they would not measure the seconds passing, but they would feel the weight of a moment. Other cultures, too, imagined. Time not as a line, but as a cycle. In Hindu philosophy, time is kala, and it turns like a wheel. The universe moves through immense ages, or yugas, repeating in vast cycles of creation and destruction. Time is endless, and yet it is not infinite. In novelty, things return again and again. In that worldview, the idea of time stopping might not seem strange. It happens at the end of each cycle. The universe exhales, pauses, and begins again. The moment between dissolution and rebirth is a sacred stillness, perhaps not unlike a frozen hour. And then consider Buddhist philosophy, where the nature of the self is questioned and time is linked to illusion. In some schools of Buddhism, the self is not a permanent identity, but a flowing bundle of sensations, memories, and consciousness, the skandhas. These arise and pass away constantly. If time stopped, the illusion of self would collapse into a stillness beyond identity. There would be no suffering, but also no self to be freed. Would this frozen hour be a glimpse of enlightenment, or a null space where meaning has no foothold? Myths, too, have tried to touch this idea. In Norse mythology, the gods await Ragnarok, the great end, but time does not simply stop, it slows. A great winter stretches endlessly. Crops fail, the sun dims. The hours grow long, but the moment of reckoning never seems to arrive. Perhaps it is a metaphor for a world stuck, paused in dread, waiting for something that refuses to come. In Christian traditions, eternity is often depicted as timelessness, not an endless extension of minutes, but the absence of change. In heaven or in divine presence, time may hold no meaning. The soul is not bound by before or after. This raises a quiet question. Is a paused hour a divine hour? Does stillness approach godliness? Let's move into modern philosophy now, and listen to the thinkers who tried to unravel time not through stories, but through structure. Immanuel Kant argued that time is not something that exists out there. Instead, it is a structure of the mind, a way we organize our experiences. In his view, space and time are categories, lenses through which we perceive reality. Without time, there can be no perception. But that doesn't mean time is real in the way rocks or rivers are. So if time paused, perhaps it would only mean our perception paused. Reality would have no ticking clock underneath. Only our minds make time flow. In contrast, philosophers like Henri Bergson believed that true time, what he called la durée or duration, was not the mechanical tick of a clock, but the inner flow of consciousness. The experience of time. If time stopped and yet consciousness continued, floating, drifting, would that be duration without chronology? And what of Martin Heidegger? He argued that human existence is fundamentally temporal. We are beings, toward death, aware of our finiteness. To be human is to stand in the tension between past and future. What happens then if time freezes? That tension disappears. There is no future to fear, no past to regret, no becoming, only being. Would this feel like death or like peace? Beyond philosophy, let's look at art. Painters and poets have long obsessed over the idea of stillness, moments suspended in time, a drop of water about to fall, a lover's gaze held just too long. A battlefield paused before the first arrow flies. These are not just images, they are experiences, a kind of emotional time dilation. We feel time slow when we are in love, or afraid, or awestruck. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we are still just able to endure, and we are so awed because it serenely disdains to destroy us." In those moments of awe, when the heart tightens, the breath catches, we might say time has stopped, not physically but phenomenologically. So in a real frozen hour, would beauty be present? Or would even that be paused? We also feel time speed up or vanish. When you are deeply absorbed, in music, in work, in conversation, hours disappear. You look up and it is dark. You have been somewhere else. This is called flow state, and it is studied in psychology. In flow, self-consciousness fades, time distorts. Action and awareness merge. If time paused and your mind remained alert, would it feel like an eternal flow or a blank stillness? Some meditators report timeless experiences, moments where the boundaries of self and time dissolve. A stillness beneath thought. A silence that is not empty but full. Could a frozen hour feel like that? Could it be peaceful? And then, of course, there is the question of fear. Humans fear the unknown, and nothing is more unknowable than nothingness. If time stopped and we were aware, would we panic? Would we scream into the stillness, hoping for sound, or would we adjust? Would we explore the silence? Would we wait? Time gives structure, but it also gives pressure, deadlines, aging, loss. Perhaps in a world without time there is no pressure, no fear of change, but also no hope of it. Imagine a world where everything stops, absolutely. No clocks tick, no dust falls, no neurons fire, no hearts beat. Now imagine that after exactly 1 hour of this impossible stillness, everything resumes as though nothing happened. The fundamental paradox is this: if nothing moved and no one remembered, did anything actually stop? The question becomes more intriguing and unsettling when you begin to explore whether such a thing could ever be detected, not during, but after. Could there be, hidden in the fabric of physical law, some trace, some microscopic fingerprint of an hour gone missing? Let's examine the possibilities. We begin, of course, with the obvious. Clocks. Mechanical clocks measure the passage of time through motion. Gears, springs, swinging pendulums. Quartz clocks measure vibrations of a crystal. Atomic clocks, the most precise tools we have, use the resonance frequency of atoms, like cesium-133, which ticks by oscillating a defined number of times per second. All of these clocks depend on physical processes. No motion, no ticking, no time. If time stopped, all such clocks would freeze, and when time resumed, they would continue, delayed by exactly 1 hour. Simple, right? Not quite, because if every process in the universe, including every form of memory and measurement, paused and resumed in perfect synchronization, no one would notice, no evidence would remain. Your watch would show the correct time relative to your heartbeat. The atomic clock would agree with the movement of Earth's rotation. Even the radioactive decay of isotopes, a natural timekeeper, would have halted. There would be no inconsistency, no glitch, no clue, unless we could compare the external universe to a sealed internal reference, something completely isolated. But that's impossible, isn't it? Because if time stopped, nothing could be exempt. Not even hypothetical observers inside black holes, not even photons in transit. Time, as we understand it, is not a local feature, it is universal. A full pause would freeze every frame of every camera, every signal in every detector. Still, let's stretch the imagination further. Suppose, or purely hypothetically, that time stopped for the observable universe, but not for some insulated system outside of it. Maybe a higher dimensional framework, or some form of computational simulator running our universe. In that case, a frozen hour might be detectable by them. If the simulation paused for an hour of their time, but resumed in our world exactly where it left off from the inside, we wouldn't know, but from their point of view, they would have witnessed a gap, a moment when nothing changed, no data updated. This opens a strange door. If we were in a simulation and it paused us for an hour, we'd never notice. But the operators might. Could this happen often? Is it happening now? We drift away from science here, into the realm of unprovable speculation. But even within physics, some have asked whether time itself might be quantized, broken into discrete units, like the pixels of a screen. If true, then what we experience, as the smooth passage of time may, at a deeper level, be built of tiny intervals, Planck time units, around 539 x 10^44 seconds long. Could a whole block of those be missing? That brings us to entropy. Entropy, the measure of disorder, always increases in a closed system. It is the arrow of time, the reason why we remember the past but not the future, why eggs break but never unbreak. It might seem like a good place to search for clues. If entropy suddenly didn't increase for an hour, could we detect it? Let's. Imagine, in a closed system like Earth's atmosphere, molecules move, mix, and spread out. If time froze, these motions would pause. When time resumes, entropy begins increasing again. But unless we had been measuring entropy in real time, with devices immune to the time pause, which is impossible, there would be no record of that missing increase. Entropy tells us that time is moving forward, but it does not store a logbook of its passage. It is not a historian, only a compass. What about radioactive decay? Let's take a lump of uranium-238. Its half-life is 4.5 billion years. In theory, we could measure how many atoms decay in a given hour. If fewer atoms decay than expected, could that suggest time had paused? Maybe, but only if we were measuring continuously with external reference data. And again, such measurement would require motion, which is frozen during the pause. When time resumes, decay resumes. But the record-keeping tools were also paused. No discrepancy would be visible. It is as if you paused both a stopwatch and the race. No one sees a delay. Is there any chaotic system sensitive enough that a pause might ripple through it? Consider weather. The atmosphere is chaotic. Small changes lead to huge consequences. The famous butterfly effect applies here. A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil might set off a tornado in Texas weeks later. In theory, if time stopped, all turbulence, all airflows would pause. No heat transfer, no convection, no Coriolis effect from Earth's spin. When time resumes, the flows continue, but ever so slightly out of sync with their prior trajectories. Could this lead to unusual weather patterns? Maybe. But here's the challenge. Weather is already unpredictable. There is always chaos, always anomalies. A delayed storm would not be evidence of time pausing. It would be written off as noise. And over long periods, the chaos would wash away any specific signature. So the ripple fades, no trail remains. Let us now take a different angle. Could time itself be an emergent phenomenon? Not a fundamental feature of the universe, but something that emerges from deeper laws? Some physicists think so. The idea is that time, like temperature, is not fundamental. At the level of individual particles, temperature does not exist. Only motion does. Temperature emerges when you average over many particles. What if time is similar? What if it emerges from entanglement, from the way particles relate to each other? If that's true, then pausing time may not mean freezing clocks. It may mean disrupting the network of relationships that create the appearance of time. In this view, time is not a river, but a pattern, and a pause is not a dam, but a glitch in the pattern. But once the glitch ends, the pattern heals, and nothing remembers. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a silence, not a hollow silence, but a complete one. A silence with no echo, no footprint, No scar. A stopped hour in a perfectly synchronized universe leaves no evidence, and if it does, it is buried in the kind of noise that cannot be teased apart from randomness or chaos or natural variance. In short, we cannot know. Not through instruments, not through numbers, not through clocks or particles or echoes in the background radiation. And yet, we wonder. And perhaps that wondering is the only trace. The idea that maybe, for just 1 hour, the universe held its breath and no one noticed. The question now shifts from the physical to the experiential. All previous explorations have assumed that if time stopped, all systems would freeze. Every atom, every field, every vibration. And when time resumed, so too would all the processes tied to those systems. But imagine a strange exception. Imagine that time stopped for everything except you. You, still conscious, still able to perceive, still able to think, to move, to observe, within a world perfectly frozen. A world where nothing answers, nothing stirs, nothing resists. What would it feel like to be the only being unbound by time? This isn't science fiction. It's a thought experiment, but a careful one, grounded in real physics. Because in entertaining such a scenario, we must ask, what is consciousness made of? What does it depend on? Neurons, electrical impulses, chemical gradients, synaptic communication, glucose metabolism, sensory feedback, memory formation. Each of these is built on physical processes governed by time. If those processes are frozen, consciousness halts. But suppose, impossibly, that a single brain or a mind-like process continues in isolation, as if it floats atop a paused world. It would not be like dreaming. It would not be like sleep. It would be more like drifting inside a sculpture, because everything and everyone else would be utterly, uncannily still. You try to speak. No. Sound comes out. Because sound requires air molecules moving, pressure waves propagating. With time stopped, the air itself is frozen. You move your arm, it rises smoothly, but your sleeve doesn't move. The folds of your clothing are stiff, stuck mid-crease. You walk. Your footsteps make no sound. The dust does not rise from beneath. Your shoes, every object you touch, a glass, a leaf, a door, resists in strange ways. Because the atoms within them are inert. They do not rearrange, do not respond to force. You can push against a door, but the wood does not flex. You can press on a book, but its pages will not turn. It's like trying to manipulate a hologram made of ice. The light around you is also frozen. A sunbeam caught through a window does not shift. Shadows do not change. You step into light, and there is no warmth, because photons too are paused. You may see us, but you do not see newly. No photons are entering your eyes. Your perception is locked to what was already present. Eventually, the retina will exhaust its responsiveness. Images will fade. The world becomes dim. What about people? You walk into a room. Your friends are there, or they were. One of them has a hand mid-air reaching for a glass. Another has a smile that never finishes forming. They are statues, but not dead, not decaying, just waiting. No breathing, no blinking, no awareness. You feel a breeze inked only in your memory. The actual air does not flow. The heat of bodies does not radiate. The smells in the room are frozen in mid-diffusion. You are the only thing moving, but even your movement is constrained. Your heartbeat begins to weaken, because your body depends on the environment. Oxygen exchange, muscle contraction, nutrient flow. Even if your mind persists, your body begins to suffer. Not instantly, but gradually. You begin to breathe, but no air moves. Your lungs expand, but there is no fresh oxygen to extract. Your blood moves, but it does not receive new fuel. Cell by cell, you begin to starve. What is thought without sensation? Without feedback. The mind loops inward. You think, and then you think about thinking. You remember what movement felt like, what conversation sounded like. You try to imagine music, but there is no rhythm. Time is not passing in the external world. There is no progression to align to. Your inner monologue stretches, disconnected from any metric. You do not know how long it has been. 5 minutes. 5 days, 5 centuries. Time without reference becomes meaningless. You sit, and in the frozen silence you realize you have no way of knowing when or if this will end. Eventually, your body gives in. Not from age, not from violence, but from imbalance. Your cells run out of energy. Your brain begins to slow. Even if time returns, you may not be able to recover. And that brings us back to reality. Because this scenario, as haunting as it is, cannot happen. Within known physics, you cannot exist outside of time. There is no known mechanism for isolating a mind from the flow of temporal evolution. Even quantum mechanics, with its strange rules, still operates within the framework of time-dependent equations. But thinking through such impossibilities helps us understand what consciousness is. It is not an ethereal glow. It is not a separate entity. It is a process, an emergent phenomenon of interacting neurons, chemical gradients, physical substrates, all evolving through time. Stop that flow, and the mind dissolves. Still, let's stretch once more. What if time had stopped, but left the electromagnetic field active? Then perhaps electrical signals in your brain might continue, but with no new sensory input, no motor output. You would think, but never speak. Remember, cantos but never act. This would be a mind trapped inside itself. You would recall that the world existed, but you could not interact with it. It would be something like being inside a coma but aware. Yet even that awareness requires energy, chemical reactions, electrical differentials. If the whole system is paused, then even the illusion of thought is lost. In the final analysis, there is no mind without time, just as there is no heat without motion, no light without photons, no music without rhythm. To be alive is to move. Through space, through thought, through time, so we return to the quietest truth. A paused universe is unknowable from within, and a consciousness outside of time cannot exist within physics as we know it. But in thinking about it, we gain something strange, an appreciation of continuity, of flow, of the quiet miracle that the world does not pause, that every heartbeat leads to the next, that memories form, that thoughts follow thoughts, and that we, however briefly, get to experience it all. We've imagined what it might feel like for time to stop, for 1 hour, for the entire universe, or for just one person. But a new question arises now, quieter and deeper. Was there ever a time before time? Can time itself begin? Or is it an eternal feature stretching endlessly in both directions? To answer that, we must go backward, not just through clocks and calendars, not just through history and biology, but through physics, through space-time, through the very laws that govern our existence. We must approach the singularity, the beginning of the universe, the place, or perhaps the moment, where everything began. But what does that mean? Let's drift through it slowly. The Big Bang is the most widely accepted model for the origin of the universe. But contrary to the name, it wasn't an explosion in space. It was the expansion of space itself. roughly 13.8 billion years ago, the entire observable universe was compressed into an unimaginably dense, hot state, smaller than an atom, hotter than the core of a star, and packed with pure energy. Then it began to expand, not into empty space, because space itself did not exist yet. Space was created in that expansion, and so was time. That last point is essential, because if time began with the Big Bang, then there was no before. The phrase "before the Big Bang" becomes meaningless, like asking what's north of the North Pole, or what's outside the universe. In this model, time itself is part of the universe, just as much as matter, energy, and space. Without a universe, there is no time. Without time, there is no change, no before or after, no cause or effect. Only stillness, or rather, not even that. Because stillness implies time too, a lack of motion through time. But if time doesn't exist, neither does stillness. There is simply no frame at all. This leads us to the strange idea that time may be emergent, that it is not fundamental, but arises from deeper, more abstract relationships. To understand this, we look to general relativity. Einstein's theory tells us that space and time are not separate entities. They are woven together into a four-dimensional fabric, space-time. Mass and energy bend that fabric, and that curvature tells objects how to move. The stronger the gravity, the slower time flows. This is not science, fiction. It is measured fact. GPS satellites must adjust for time dilation due to both their speed and their altitude. Without those corrections, your navigation would drift by kilometers each day. So time is not absolute. It is malleable, it stretches, it compresses, and if space is shaped, then time is shaped too. Now consider the earliest universe. At the singularity, the point from which everything emerged, gravity was infinite. Temperature was infinite. The laws of physics as we know them break down. We do not know what happens there. It is a boundary, not just of space, but of understanding. But one thing seems likely. Time, as we define it, did not exist before that point. Because before requires a sequence. And the singularity was not part of a sequence. It was the start of one. Quantum cosmology takes this further. Some models suggest that the early universe was governed by quantum fluctuations, probabilistic events with no fixed order. Time in this framework is not a river but a ripple, a statistical emergence. One of the most famous attempts to describe this is the Hartley-Hawking no-boundary proposal. According to this model, the universe didn't have a beginning in the traditional sense. Instead, time transitions into space near the origin. In other words, near the Big Bang, time behaves like a spatial dimension. Imagine walking north, closer and closer to the North Pole. As you approach the pole, the concept of north begins to lose meaning. At the pole itself there is no north, only the start of directions pointing south. In the Hartle-Hawking model, time works the same way. It doesn't start at a sharp point. It gradually fades in. There is no singular moment when time begins, just a smooth emergence like the soft curve of the Earth at the horizon. This removes the need for a before, because time itself is not sharply defined at the origin. It's like a fog lifting, or a whisper turning into speech. But how do we measure that transition? What defines the moment time becomes meaningful? Entropy might again be our guide. In physics, time's arrow, the direction from past to future, is tied to the increase of entropy. In the early universe, entropy was low, structure was simple. Over time, complexity increased. stars formed, galaxies emerged, life evolved. So some physicists suggest that time, as we know it, began when entropy began to increase. Before that, there was no meaningful distinction between past and future, only a quantum haze. This leads to another possibility. Time has no absolute direction. It may be that the universe expands in both directions from a point of lowest entropy. One direction becomes our past, the other, an alternate universe's future. In this mirror image, time flows away from the center, but differently on either side. We only perceive one half. We are creatures born in the unfolding, and yet, time is not only a scientific idea, it is an experience. The ticking of clocks is only a proxy for something deeper. The unfolding of events, the flow of awareness, the sense that one moment leads to the next. Some philosophers argue that time is not real, that it is an illusion created by the human mind, an attempt to impose order on a constantly shifting present. In this view, only the present moment exists. The past is memory. The future is imagination. The flow of time is a trick of consciousness. But even if that were true, that the illusion is consistent. It follows patterns. It obeys laws, and those laws emerge from the physical universe. So whether time is fundamental, emergent, or illusory, it shapes us, and we shape it. As we drift now through the question of beginnings, we begin to feel the vastness of our ignorance. Time may be an echo of deeper truths. It may be a side effect of entropy, a structure emerging from quantum entanglement, a loop, a ripple, a byproduct of gravity, or a story we tell ourselves. But one thing seems clear. If time stopped, or had never started, we would not be here, because life is built on change, and change requires time. The rotation of Earth, the rhythm of tides, the blinking of eyes, the beating of hearts, the unfolding of thoughts. We are made of time. Its start is our start. Its silence would be our end. We have drifted backward toward the beginnings of time and found only uncertainty, boundaries of knowledge where the past ceases to exist in any meaningful way. Now we float forward, not in years or centuries, but in a more abstract sense, toward the idea of finality. Could time itself end? Could there be a moment when the arrow of time no longer points anywhere, when the unfolding halts, when cause no longer follows effect? To answer this, we must explore the possibilities of how the universe itself might evolve or dissolve. Let's begin with the most grounded possibility, the heat death of the universe. The term heat death is misleading. It does not mean fire. It means stillness, cold, lifeless stillness. It describes a final state where the universe has reached maximum entropy, a point where energy is spread so evenly that no work can be done. Everything is the same temperature. No gradients, no motion, no stars, no fusion, no meaningful interactions. In this scenario, time does not stop in a mechanical sense, but it loses meaning, because time, as experienced, is not just the ticking of clocks, it is the change between states. A memory forms, a star ignites, a cell divides. Without change, time is directionless, not frozen but flat. In a heat-dead universe, change still technically occurs. At the quantum level, particles may fluctuate, but on large scales, nothing of note ever happens again. No new stars, no new complexity. If this is our fate, then the universe becomes like a photograph, infinite in extent, but devoid of motion. Time remains but is meaningless. Another possibility is the Big Crunch. If the expansion of the universe were to reverse, If gravity somehow overcomes dark energy, everything would collapse back into a dense state. Galaxies drawn inward, stars devoured, atoms crushed. In this violent symmetry of the Big Bang, all space contracts. Time, in general relativity, is tied to space. So as space shrinks, time also distorts. Approaching the final singularity, time would begin to slow. Not from an external observer's view, for there would be no such observers, but in the internal unfolding of the universe itself. Time might grind to a halt at the moment of total collapse, a mirror image of its beginning. This would be not just the end of matter, but the end of clocks, memories, causes, and effects. Time, like space, would have boundaries, a beginning and an end. But modern observations suggest this is unlikely. Our universe is not contracting, it is expanding and accelerating. That brings us to a darker fate. The Big Rip. If dark energy, the mysterious force driving this acceleration, grows stronger over time, then expansion may not just continue but intensify. Galaxies would drift apart faster and faster, then stars, then solar systems. Eventually, even atoms would be torn apart. Space-time itself would be stretched to infinity, inti. This extreme version of cosmic death, time becomes fragmented, because time is defined by relationships, between objects, between particles, between events. If everything is ripped apart and no interaction remains, then time loses coherence. It doesn't stop exactly. It ceases to be shared. Each fragment, each point of space-time becomes isolated. Like tiny islands in an ocean that has vanished, no light connects them, no signals pass, no effects ripple outward. You could say, time ends in a big rip, not because clocks stop, but because nothing can experience time anymore. There is a subtler question too. Even without a cosmic catastrophe, could conscious time end? What if the universe continues forever, but becomes uninhabitable? No stars, no life, no memory. In such a state, physical time still marches on, but the experience of time disappears. This too is a kind of ending, because time without observers is like music without ears, mathematically beautiful perhaps, but silent. The end of time might not be marked by a singularity, it might be marked by absence. Let us now drift closer to black holes. Black holes are not just massive objects, they are boundaries in space-time, event horizons beyond which information cannot return. Time near a black hole behaves strangely. To a distant observer, clocks near the event horizon appear to slow. From the outside, it seems as if the infalling object never quite crosses, just slows, redshifts, and fades. But to the object falling in, time proceeds normally, until the moment it crosses the horizon. Beyond that, all paths lead inward, toward the singularity. There again the laws of physics break, and time becomes ill-defined. If you were to fall into a black hole, your experience of time would not end abruptly, but it would be warped, compressed, drawn into a point. You would reach the singularity in finite time, and then nothing further, no future, no continuation, just a wall, a final coordinate with no exit. So in this local sense, time ends. Not universally, but personally. And yet time remains elusive. Even if the universe were to continue endlessly, ever expanding, ever thinning, the definition of time becomes slippery. With fewer events, fewer changes, fewer observers, how? Do you mark time? A billion years pass and but nothing happens. Then another billion and another. the emptiness becomes a kind of stillness. Is time still flowing? Or has it become indistinguishable from eternity? Some physicists propose that time may be cyclic, that the universe goes through endless expansions and contractions. In such models, time never truly ends. It resets. But this idea remains speculative. We have no evidence for a prior universe, only equations and silence. One final question remains. Is time a property of the universe or of the observer? Could it be that time ends for you before it ends for the universe, when the neurons in your brain stop firing, when the last breath escapes, when the light in your eyes fades? Does time go on? Or is that moment for you the end of all time? There is no scientific answer here, only the quiet truth. Time is real, but it is also personal. Its flow shapes our thoughts, its rhythms define our lives, and its ending, whenever, wherever, however it comes, is the final fact we all share. So, we ask again, could time end? Yes, in many ways. Entropy, collapse, disintegration, isolation, stillness, death. But until then, time continues, tick by tick, breath by breath, thought by thought. And in that continuation, we find meaning, even if the meaning fades. So far, we've explored time on the grandest scales: the origin of the universe, the collapse of stars, the stretching of space-time. But now we turn inward, because time does not live only in galaxies or equations, it lives in us, in the rhythms of our hearts, the cycles of our cells, the slow drift of our memories. We are not just observers of time, we are made of it. So, what does time mean to the human body? How do we sense it? Why does it speed up as we age and slow down in crisis? And what happens inside us when time externally appears still? Let us begin with the most fundamental rhythm of all, the circadian clock. The circadian rhythm, every human being carries within them a biological clock, a roughly 24-hour cycle that governs sleep, wakefulness, hormone release, body temperature, and even gene expression. This is called the circadian rhythm, from the Latin circa, meaning about, and diem, meaning day. It is ancient. Even simple organisms, like cyanobacteria, have circadian patterns. It is not a product of consciousness, but of evolution. Life adapted to the predictable rhythm of light and darkness long before humans existed. In humans, the master clock resides in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, a cluster of about 20,000 neurons located in the hypothalamus, just above the optic chiasm. This tiny structure receives input from the eyes, particularly from a special set of cells that detect blue light. It uses that light to synchronize the internal rhythm with the outside world. When the sun rises, light suppresses melatonin, the hormone that helps us sleep. Cortisol rises, alertness increases, and metabolism shifts. When the sun sets, melatonin production begins again. Body temperature drops and the mind prepares to rest. This rhythm is not just about sleep. It affects nearly every system in the body. Disrupting it through jet lag, night shifts, or constant artificial lighting can increase the risk of metabolic disease, depression, even cancer. Our internal time is not optional. It is foundational, and it cannot be ignored without cost. Ultradian and infradian rhythms, but the circadian rhythm is not the only biological clock. There are faster rhythms, ultradian rhythms, that occur many times within a 24-hour cycle. These include the cycles of alertness and fatigue that rise and fall every 90 to 120 minutes. You may feel this during work, intense focus followed by a period of distraction. This is not laziness, it is rhythm. There are slower rhythms too, infradian rhythms that take longer than 24 hours. The menstrual cycle is one. Seasonal affective changes are another. Even mood and cognitive function have been observed to follow infradian patterns. We are not static beings in a flowing world. We are oscillating systems in a world of cycles. Each layer of time, from seconds to seasons, lives in our cells. Time perception. Yet biological clocks are only part of the story. The experience of time, how fast or slow it feels, is something else entirely. Why does childhood summer feel infinite while adult months vanish in a blink? Why do seconds stretch in fear, yet hours collapse in joy? Let's explore. The perception of time involves several brain regions, notably the basal ganglia, prefrontal cortex, cerebellum, and insula. There is no single clock in the brain. Instead, time perception arises from distributed networks, interacting with memory, attention, and emotion. Here's how. When you are paying close attention to time, watching a clock, waiting for something, your brain passes the moments. Finally, each second is distinct. Time feels slow. But when you are absorbed in a task or in flow or in fear, your attention shifts. The brain stops marking each tick. Later, looking back, time feels like it vanished. Emotion affects this too. High arousal, like fear or surprise, often slows time subjectively. This is likely an evolutionary adaptation. In danger, a stretched sense of time helps focus, plan, and react. But in calm states or routines, the opposite happens. Time collapses. Days blur. Weeks merge. This is why in adulthood, life seems to accelerate. Routine increases, novelty decreases, and memory becomes sparse. It's not that time is moving faster. It's that your brain is recording less, and memory is the anchor of perceived time. Memory and temporal illusions. Memory doesn't just store time, it constructs it. Your sense of how long something lasted is often a reconstruction based on how many events occurred within it, how novel they were, and how emotional they felt. This is why vacations feel long in memory but short during, or why traumatic events seem to last forever. It's not about clocks. It's about change. The more changes your brain records in environment, emotion, thought, the longer time seems in retrospect. This leads to temporal illusions, phenomena, where time appears to speed up or slow down depending on context. Some well-known examples: chronostasis, the stopped clock illusion, when you glance at a clock and the second hand seems frozen momentarily. Tachypsychia, time slowing down during extreme stress or danger. The holiday paradox, vacations feel long when remembered, but short while experienced. These illusions reveal something profound. Time is not a constant in human life. It is elastic, constructed, and deeply subjective. Development and time perception also changes with age. Children live in a world of firsts. First experiences, first emotions, first pains. Each moment is filled with novelty. The brain encodes more data per unit of time, so time feels slow. As adults, novelty declines, the brain records less, and so time speeds up. In old age, time may feel like it is rushing. Years collapse into patterns. Holidays repeat. The richness of encoded moments shrinks, but it's not inevitable. Studies show that increasing novelty, learning, travel, new relationships, can slow the perception of time again. It's not about youth, It's about attention and presence. Disorders of temporal perception. Sometimes, time perception goes awry. Certain neurological and psychiatric conditions can distort time dramatically. In Parkinson's disease, time estimation becomes unreliable, linked to dopamine dysfunction in the basal ganglia. In schizophrenia, some patients experience disordered temporal continuity. Events feel fragmented or out of sequence. In depression, time often feels painfully slow. Moments drag. The future feels unreachable. In mania, the opposite occurs. Time races, thought speed, urgency rises. These disorders reveal just how fragile the construction of time can be. We rely on neurochemical balance, sensory input, and cognitive coherence to feel time. Disrupt any of those and time fractures. Dreams and time. Perhaps the strangest distortion of time occurs in dreams. In dreams, hours can pass in minutes, or minutes can stretch impossibly. The brain, cut off from external time cues, constructs a temporal world of its own, one filled with loops, reversals, and discontinuities. This raises a subtle point. Do we need external time to feel time, or can the brain simulate it entirely on its own? If so, then time is not a thing we observe. It is a thing we generate, just like vision, just like sound, just like thought. Time is a cognitive product, not a measurement, but a model. As we prepare to close this reflection, we return to the central idea. Time is not a single concept. It is layered. It is physical, biological, psychological, emotional. It exists in the spin of electrons and the rise of the sun, in the heartbeat, in the sigh in the aging face, in the flicker of memory, in the stillness of meditation. And in the storm of crisis, time lives in us. Even if the universe froze, we might still feel its echo, in our bodies, in our thoughts, in our fading memories, because we are not just creatures in time, we are its expression. We have traveled across cosmic scales and cellular pulses, tracing time from the origin of the universe to the depths of the human mind. But now we arrive at the final and most delicate question. Is it possible, even for a moment, to step outside of time? Not physically, perhaps, for we know the laws of physics resist the notion, but psychologically, spiritually, philosophically, can time be suspended within us? And if so, what does it mean? Let us begin where time softens naturally, in deep sleep, sleep and the suspension of time. Each night, as the lights fade and the body settles, we drift into a different kind of awareness. Sleep is not unconsciousness. It is structured, layered, and purposeful, and it transforms our sense of time. In deep sleep, particularly during slow-wave sleep or stage N3, the brain enters a state of low-frequency, high-amplitude delta waves. Awareness disappears, dreams fade, thought stops. It is a kind of biological silence. For many, time seems to vanish during this stage. Hours pass, yet the sleeper feels only a blink. There is no memory of the experience, only the result. You lie down at night. You wake in the morning, and somewhere in between time disappeared. This state, where time is neither measured nor felt, is perhaps the closest we come to existing outside the clock. But it is not chosen. It is passive, and it comes with amnesia. To find time's edge in waking life, we must go deeper, into meditation, flow states, and altered consciousness. Meditation and the collapsing of time. In many contemplative traditions, meditation is described not as thinking, but as resting in the present. In practice, This often involves focused attention on breath, sound, body, and the gentle release of thoughts. Over time, the meditator learns to observe the mind without chasing it. Neuroscience shows that in deep meditation, brain activity in the default mode network, the system linked to self-referential thought and internal narration, decreases. As the mental noise quiets, so does the sense of time. Experienced meditators often report a profound timelessness. Minutes stretch or vanish. Time becomes irrelevant, not absent but unimportant. This is not imagination. Studies using EEG and fMRI reveal changes in the brain's time-processing regions, including the insular and prefrontal cortex, during long meditative states. Time, it seems, is not a fixed presence in consciousness. It is shaped by attention, and when attention turns inward, away from clocks, away from narrative, time loses its grip. Flow states and temporal dissolution. Another realm where time fades is in what psychologists call flow, a state of total absorption in a task, first described by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Flow occurs when skill matches challenge, and the task at hand becomes effortless. Writers describe hours vanishing while crafting a sentence. Athletes feel slowed perception during peak performance. Musicians lose awareness of everything but the notes. In these states, the brain enters a unique pattern: high focus, low self-consciousness, and altered sense of time. In some cases, time slows. Actions seem to stretch, anticipation rises. In others, time speeds. Hours feel like moments. But the common factor is this: the person is no longer watching time, they are inside the moment, outside the clock. Just as in meditation, brain scans show altered activity in the default mode network. Self-reference drops. The passage of time, normally constructed by mental narration, becomes irrelevant. This suggests that time is not simply what the clock says. It is what the mind notices. And when the mind stops noticing, time softens. Drugs, dreaming, and the distortion of time. There are less natural ways to disrupt time, through pharmacology, certain substances, from psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin to dissociatives like ketamine, can radically alter time perception. Users describe minutes stretching into eternities or hours compressing into flashes. Some experience time as looping, freezing, or reversing. While these experiences are unreliable and not always safe, they do provide insights. Neuroscientific research suggests that psychedelics disrupt activity in timekeeping regions of the brain, including the cerebellum, basal ganglia, and thalamus. They also interfere with the brain's ability to construct linear narratives, the very stories that organize past, present, and future. In altered states, time becomes non-linear. It ceases to be a line. It becomes a space, one in which the mind can wander freely, unbound by the clock. This too suggests that time as experienced, is constructed, not inherited, and it can be dismantled. The physics of time. Revisited, of course, psychological escape is one thing, but what about physical reality? Can anything truly step outside of time? The answer, as far as we know, is no. In physics, time is baked into the structure of the universe. It is the fourth dimension of space-time, inseparable from space itself. Every atom, every photon, every interaction depends on time to occur. But there are conditions where time behaves differently. For instance, near the event horizon of a black hole, time slows dramatically. To an outside observer, an object falling into the hole appears to freeze at the edge, red shifting into invisibility. Inside the hole, According to general relativity, time and space exchange roles. What that means is still debated, but it implies that time is relative, not absolute. Time also breaks down at the Planck scale, the smallest possible unit of measurement, where quantum fluctuations dominate. Here, classical time ceases to function. Some theories, like loop quantum gravity, propose that time is not fundamental but emergent, a product of more basic relationships. In this view, time is not a flow, but a statistical illusion, the result of entropy increasing, information dispersing. If this is true, then perhaps the deepest escape from time is not in sleep or silence, but in understanding, in recognizing that time is not real but constructed, by particles, by laws, by minds. Death and the edge of time finally. We must touch the quietest threshold of all, the boundary of life. What happens to time at the moment of death? Accounts of near-death experiences often include time distortion, the life flashing before eyes, the sense of stillness or endlessness. Some believe this is due to a sudden flood of neural activity, the brain's final fireworks. Others think it's an illusion constructed in retrospect. Regardless, time for that person ends, not because it stops, but because there is no longer anyone to perceive it. This may be the ultimate truth. Time requires a mind. Without memory, without consciousness, without change, time is meaningless. It is not an object, but a lens. Not a path, but a pattern. And when the observer vanishes, so does the clock, closing reflections. So what if time stopped for 1 hour? In physics, it would be impossible, because time is needed for change, for interaction, for meaning. In biology, it would be fatal, because every cell, every breath, every heartbeat depends on time. In the mind, it is possible, but only as an illusion. We can still time, stretch it, forget it. We can meditate until moments blur, sleep until hours vanish, or immerse ourselves so deeply in a task that we forget the ticking entirely. But time, like gravity, always returns, because time is not outside of us, it is within. Beating quietly, like a pulse, like breath, like thought, and the truest pause we can find is not the absence of time waste, but presence, fully, gently and silently here, now, always now.